Black Beauty by Sewell. Chapter 1. The first place that I can remember was a large meadow with a pond of clear water in it. While I was young, I could not eat grass, so I lived upon my mother's milk. As soon as I could eat grass, my mother started to work in the daytime and came back in the evening. In the meadow there were 6 young colts who were older than I was. I used to play with them. Sometimes we kicked and beat while we were playing. One day we kicked and beat a lot, and my mother said to me, "These colts are cart-horse colts, and they do not have good manners. You are well-bred. Your father has a great reputation here. Your grandfather won the cup 2 years at the Newmarket races. Your grandmother was the sweetest of any horses I ever knew, and you have never seen me kick or bite. I hope you will grow up kind and good, and never bite or kick even in play." I have always remembered my mother's advice. She was a wise old horse, and our master respected her. Her name was Duchess, but he often called her Pet. Our master was a good and kind man, and my mother loved him very much. He often patted and stroked her with the words, "Well, old Pet, and how is your little darky?" I was black, and he called me Darky. I think we were his favorites. There was a ploughboy, Dick, who sometimes came into our field for blackberries from the hedge. When he ate all the blackberries, he started throwing stones and sticks at the colts to make them gallop. Sometimes a stone hit and hurt us. One day, he thought our master was in the next field and started playing this game. But our master was there. He watched what was going on, so he jumped over the hedge and caught Dick by the arm. "Bad boy," he said. "Here, take your money and go home. I don't want you on my farm anymore." So we never saw Dick again. Before I was 2 years old, something happened which I have never forgotten. We were feeding at the lower part of the field when we heard what sounded like the cry of dogs. The oldest of the colts raised his head, pricked his ears, and said, "There are the hounds." "They have found a hare," said my mother, "and if they come this way, we shall see the hunt." And soon the dogs were all running down the field of young wheat next to ours. They were making a terrible noise, kept on a yo, yo, oh, oh, at the top of their voices. After them came men on horseback. They were all galloping as fast as they could, but suddenly they stopped. The dogs ran away barking, with their noses to the ground. "They have lost the scent," said the old horse. "Perhaps the hare will escape." "What hare?" I said. "Oh, I don't know what hare. Any hare they can find will be good for the dogs and men to run after." And soon the dogs began their yo, yo, oh, oh again. "Now we shall see the hare," said my mother. And at that moment a frightened hare rushed by and headed for the woods. Then appeared the dogs, followed by the hunters. The hare tried to get through the fence, but it was too late. We heard one shriek, and that was the end of the hare. I was so astonished that I didn't at first see what was going on by the brook. 2 horses were down. One was struggling in the stream, and the other was groaning on the grass. One of the riders was getting out of the water. The other lay quite still. "His neck is broken," said my mother. "And serves him right, too," said one of the colts. I thought the same, but not my mother. "Well, no," she said. "I could never understand why men are so fond of this sport. They often hurt themselves, often spoil good horses and fields. And this is all done for a hare or a fox that they could get more easily some other way. My master was the first to raise that poor young man. His head fell back and his arms hung down, and everyone looked very serious. The riders carried him to our master's house. I heard that it was young George Gordon, the squire's only son, a fine, tall young man, and the pride of his family. Everybody was busy doing something. They rode off to the doctor's, to the farrier's, and to Squire Gordon's to tell him no about his son. Mr. Bond, the farrier, came to look at the black horse lying on the grass. One of his legs was broken. Then someone ran to our master's house and came back with a gun. There was a loud bang and a dreadful shriek, and then all was still. The black horse moved no more. My mother was very upset. She knew that horse. His name was Rob Roy, and he was a good horse. Some days after, we looked over the gate and saw a long, strange black coach with black cloth on it. It was drawn by black horses. They were carrying young Gordon to the churchyard to bury him. He would never ride again, and Rob Roy was dead too. And it was all for one little hare. Chapter 2. I was now growing handsome. My coat was fine, soft, and bright black. I had one white foot and a pretty white star on my forehead. When I was 4 years, old Squire Gordon came to look at me. He examined my eyes, my mouth, and my legs. Then I had to walk and trot and gallop before him. He liked me and said, "He'll be a good horse." He promised to break me in himself, and the next day he began doing it. Probably you don't know what breaking in is, so I will describe it. It means to teach a horse to wear a saddle and bridle, and to carry on his back a man, woman, or child, to go just the way they wish, and quietly. He must never start at what he sees, nor speak to other horses, nor bite, nor kick, nor have any will of his own. So, you see, this breaking in is a great thing. Finally, one morning, my master got on my back and rode me round the meadow on the soft grass. It felt very strange, but I felt rather proud to carry my master. The next unpleasant business was putting on iron shoes. My master went with me to the smith's. The blacksmith took my feet in his hand, one after the other, and cut away some of the hoof. It didn't pain me. Then he took a piece of iron, the shape of my foot, and drove some nails through the shoe into my hoof. My feet felt very stiff and heavy, but soon I got used to it. And then my master broke me to harness. So in time I got used to everything and could do my work as well as my mother did. I must mention one part of my training which is a very great advantage. My master sent me for a fortnight to a neighboring farmer's, who had a meadow close to the railway. Here I was among some sheep and cows. I shall never forget the first train that ran by. I heard a strange sound at a distance, and a long black train flew by. I was astonished and frightened. In the course of the day many other trains went by. Some stopped at the station close by with an awful shriek. I thought it was very dreadful. But the cows went on eating very quietly and hardly raised their heads. At first I was very afraid of this terrible creature, but soon I began to ignore it and care as little about it as the cows and sheep did. Thanks to my good master's care, I am as fearless at railway stations as in my own stable. So, that's the way to break in a young horse well. My master often drove me together with my mother. She could teach me better than a strange horse. She told me the better I behaved, the better my master would treat me. She also said, "There are a lot of kinds of men. There are good, thoughtful men like our master, and there are bad, cruel men who never should have their own horse or dog. I hope you will have a good master, but a horse never knows who may buy him or who may drive him. It is all a chance for us." Early in May, a man came from Square Gardens and took me away to the hall. My master said, "Goodbye, Darky. Be a good horse and always do your best." I could not say goodbye, as you know horses don't talk. So I put my nose into his hand. He patted me kindly, and I left my first home. The groom put me into a fine box in the stable. It was clean and airy. I never was in a better box than that. He gave me some very nice oats, patted me, spoke kindly, and then went away. In the stall next to mine stood a little fat gray pony with a thick mane and tail, a very pretty head, and a little nose. I put my head up to the iron rails at the top of my box and said, "How do you do? What is your name?" He turned round and said, "My name is Merrylegs. I am very handsome. I carry the young ladies on my back, and sometimes I take our mistress out in the low chair. They love me a lot. Are you going to live in this box?" I said yes. Then he said, "I hope you do not bite. I don't like it." At this moment I saw a horse's head from the stall beyond. This was a tall chestnut mare with a long, handsome neck. She looked at me and said, "It is a very strange thing for a colt like you to come and turn a lady out of her own home." "I beg your pardon," I said. "I have turned no one out. The man who brought me put me here. And I am not a colt. I am 4 years old, a grown-up horse. And it is my wish to live at peace with everybody." "Well," she said, "we shall see." In the afternoon, when she went out, Merrylegs told me all about her. "Ginger has a bad habit of biting and snapping. That is why they call her Ginger," said Merrylegs. "I told him I never bit anything but grass, hay, and corn, and didn't understand why Ginger liked doing it." "I don't think she likes it," said Merrylegs. "It is just a bad habit." The name of the coachman was John Manley. He had a wife and one little child. They lived in the coachman's cottage very near the stables. The next morning, the squire came in to look at me, and he seemed pleased. He said, "John, I wanted to try the new horse this morning, but I have other business, so do it yourself." "I will, sir," said John. So after breakfast he came to ride me. He rode me first slowly, then a trot, then a canter, and then he touched me with his whip, and we had a splendid gallop. As we came back through the park, we met the squire and Mrs. Gordon walking. They stopped and John jumped off. "Well, John, how was it?" "Excellent, sir," answered John. "That's well," said the squire. "I will try him myself tomorrow." The next day I was brought up for my master. I remembered my mother's and my old master's advice, so I tried to do exactly what he wanted me to do. He was a very good rider, and thoughtful for his horse, too. When he came home, the lady was standing at the hall door. "Well, my dear," she said, "how do you like him?" "He is exactly what John said," he replied. "A very pleasant horse. What shall we call him?" "How about Ebony?" she said. "He's as black as ebony." "No, not Ebony. Will you call him Blackbird, like your uncle's old horse?" "No, he is more handsome than old Blackbird." "Yes," she said, "he's a real beauty. He has such a sweet face and such a fine, intelligent eye. What about calling him Black Beauty?" "Black Beauty? I think that is a very good name. If you like, it shall be his name." And so I was called Black Beauty. John was very proud of me. He made my mane and tail almost as smooth as a lady's hair. He talked to me a lot. At first I didn't understand all he said, but I learned more and more to know what he meant and what he wanted me to do. I grew very fond of him. He was so gentle and kind. James Howard, the stable boy, was gentle and pleasant in his way, too. So I thought I was very lucky. One day I had to go out with Ginger in the carriage. I wondered how we shall get on together, but she behaved very well, and I couldn't wish to have a better partner. As for Merrylegs, he and I soon became great friends. He was such a cheerful little fellow that he was a favorite with everyone, especially with Miss Jessie and Flora, who often rode him and had games with him, and their little dog Frisky. Our master had 2 other horses in another stable. One was used for riding or for the luggage cart, and was called Justice. The other was an old brown hunter, Sir Oliver by name. He did not work now, but was a great favorite with the master. Chapter 3. I was happy in my new place. What more could I want? Why, liberty! For 3.5 years of my life I had had liberty. But now, week after week, month after month, year after year, I must be in a stable, and leave it only when they wanted me. I am not complaining. I know it must be so. I only mean to say that for a young horse, full of strength and energy, it is hard never to have liberty to do as you like. Sometimes I felt so full of life that when John took me out to exercise, I really could not keep quiet. I jumped or danced, but he was always good and patient. "Steady, steady, my boy," he said. But as soon as we were out of the village, he would give me a few miles at a trot. When spirited horses do not have enough exercise, they are often called skittish. It is only play, but some grooms punish them. John did not do it, because he knew it was only high spirits. But sometimes we had our liberty for a few hours. It happened on Sundays in the summer-time. The carriage never went out on Sundays because the church was not far off. It was a great treat to us when we were in the home paddock or the old orchard. The grass was so cool and soft to our feet, the air so sweet, and we were free to do what we liked, to gallop, to lie down and roll over on our backs, or to nibble the sweet grass. It was a very good time for talking, too. One day, Ginger and I stood alone in the shade, talking. She wanted to know all about my bringing up and breaking in, and I told her. "Well," said she, "I do not have your upbringing, and cannot have such a good temper as you do." "Why not?" I said. "All in my life was different," she replied. "I never had a horse or a man who was that kind to me, or that I cared to please. I had no kind master like yours to look after me and talk to me and bring me nice things to eat. The men that took care of us never gave me a kind word in my life. Of course it made us wilder. We had very good fun in the free meadows, chasing each other round and round the field. But when it came to breaking in, that was a bad time for me. Several men came to catch me. They did not give me a chance to know what they wanted. I had a lot of spirit and was very wild. No doubt I gave them plenty of trouble. But it was dreadful to be shut up in a stall day after day without having my liberty. There was one man, the old master, Mr. Ryder, who could have done anything with me, but he had given all the hard part of the job to his son. His son was a strong, tall, bold man. They called him Samson, and he often boasted that no horse could throw him. There was no gentleness in him, but only hardness, a hard voice, a hard eye, a hard hand, and I felt that he wanted to make me into a quiet, humble, obedient piece of horseflesh. Horseflesh! Ginger stamped her foot. The very thought of him made her angry. Then she went on. "I think he drank a lot, and I'm sure that the oftener he drank, the worse it was for me. One day he had worked me very hard, and when I lay down, I was tired and miserable and angry. It all seemed so hard. The next morning he came early and ran me round again for a long time. I felt my whole spirit was against him, and I began to kick and rear as I had never done before. We had a regular fight. At last, after a terrible struggle, I threw him off backward, and he fell heavily on the turf. I galloped off to the other end of the field. There I turned round. My persecutor was now going into the stable. I stood under an oak tree and watched, but no one came to catch me. The time went on. The sun was very hot. I felt hungry, but there was not enough grass in that meadow for a goose to live on. I wanted to lie down and rest, but with the saddle that was not comfortable, and there was not a drop of water to drink. The sun was getting low. I saw the other colts led in, and I knew they were having a good feed. As the sun went down, the old master came out with a sieve in his hand. He was a very fine old gentleman with white hair. He came quietly along, shaking about the oats that he had in the sieve, and speaking cheerfully and gently to me. "Come along, lassie, come along, lassie. Come along, come along." He held the oats to me, and I began to eat without fear. Then he took the rein and led me to the stable. At the door stood Samson. "Stand back," said the master. "You have not learned your trade yet, Samson." Then he led me into my box, took off the saddle and bridle with his own hands, and tied me up. Then he called for a pail of warm water and a sponge, took off his coat, and while the stableman held the pail, he sponged my sides. "Whoa, my pretty one," he said, "stand still, stand still." His very voice did me good, and the bathing was very comfortable. After that he often came to see me, and they called another breaker, Job. He went on training me, and I soon learned what he wanted. One day, when Ginger and I were together in the paddock, she told me about her first place. After my breaking in, a dealer bought me to match another chestnut horse. For some weeks he drove us together, and then he sold us to a fashionable gentleman in London. He often drove us in the park and other fashionable places. If you never had a check rein on, you don't know what it is. But I can tell you, it is dreadful. It was enough to drive one mad. "Didn't your master care about you?" I said. "No," said she. "He only cared to be stylish. I think he knew very little about horses. He left that to his coachman, who told him I had a really bad temper. I was willing and ready to work hard. But what right did they have to make me suffer like that? I had soreness in my mouth and pain in my neck. So I grew more and more restless and irritable, and I began to snap and kick when anyone came to harness me. The groom beat me for this. I soon broke a lot of harness, and that was an end of that place. After this I was sent to Tattersall's to be sold there, and another dealer bought me for my handsome looks and good paces. Soon he found out what I could not bear, and then sold me as a quiet horse to a gentleman in the country. That gentleman was a good master, but his old groom left him, and a new one came, and he was like Samson. He always spoke in a rude and impatient voice. Everything he did was rude, and I began to hate him. He wanted to make me afraid of him, but one day I bit him, and he got very mad at me. He began to hit me on the head with a riding whip. After that, he never dared to come into my stall again. My heels and my teeth were ready for him, and he knew it. As for my master, I was quiet with him, but he listened to what the man said, and I was sold again. The same dealer heard of me, and I came here not long before you did. I decided that men were my natural enemies, and I must defend myself. It is very different here, but who knows how long it will last? "Well," I said, "I think it will be a real shame if you bite or kick John or James." "I don't mean to," she said, "if they are good to me." I was sorry for Ginger, but as the weeks went on, she grew much more gentle and cheerful, and one day James said, "I believe that mare is getting fond of me. This morning I rubbed her forehead, and she whinnied after me." "She'll be as good as Black Beauty," said John. "Kindness is all the physic she wants, poor thing." Master noticed the change too, and one day when he got out of the carriage and came to speak to us as he often did, he stroked her beautiful neck. "Well, my pretty one, well, how are things with you now? I think you're a little bit happier than when you came to us." She put her nose up to him in a friendly, trustful way while he rubbed it gently. "We shall improve her, John," he said. "Yes, sir, she is not the same creature that she was," said John. Chapter 4. Mr. Blomfield, the vicar, had a large family of boys and girls. Sometimes they came and played with Miss Jessie and Flora. On the days when they came, there was plenty of work for Merrylegs. They got on him by turns and wrote him all about the orchard and the home paddock. One afternoon he was out with them for a very long time, and James said to him, "Mind how you behave yourself, or we shall get into trouble." "What have you done, Merrylegs?" I asked. "Oh," said he, tossing his little head, "I have given those young people a lesson. They did not know when to stop, so I just pitched them off backward. That was the only thing they could understand." "What?" said I. "You threw the children off? Did you throw Miss Jessie or Miss Flora?" He looked very much offended and said, "Of course not. I'm careful of our young ladies and I teach them to ride. I'm the best friend and the best riding master those children have. It's not them, it is the boys," said he, shaking his mane. "Boys are different. You must break them in like us when we were colts. And you must teach them what's what." They rode me by turns, and I galloped them for an hour up and down the fields and about the orchard. But at last I thought that it was enough. I stopped 2 or 3 times to give them a hint. Boys, you see, think a horse or a pony is like a steam engine or a thrashing machine, and they never get tired. So I just rose up on my hind legs and let the boy, who was whipping me, slip off behind. That was all. He mounted me again, and I did the same. Then the other boy got up, and as soon as he began to use his stick, he was on the grass, and so on till they were able to understand. They are not bad boys. They don't wish to be cruel. I like them, but, you see, I wanted to give them a lesson. "If I had been you," said Ginger, "I would have given those boys a good kick, and that would have given them a lesson." "No doubt about that," said Merrylegs, "but those children are under my charge when they are riding. The other day I heard our master say to Mrs. Blomfield, 'My dear madam, you need not to be anxious about the children. My old Merrylegs will take as much care of them as you or I could. He is so perfectly good-tempered and trustworthy. Do you think I am such an ungrateful brute as to forget all the kind treatment I am having here because a couple of ignorant boys used me badly? No, no. You never had a good place where they were kind to you, and so you don't know. And I'm sorry for you, but I can tell you, good places make good horses. I love our people," said Merrylegs. "Besides," he went on, "what will they do if I kick? They will sell me to some bad place. I hope I shall never come to that." Ginger and I were not carriage horses. We were more racing horses. As for us, our greatest pleasure was when we were saddled for a riding party. The master on Ginger, the mistress on me, and the young ladies on Sir Oliver and Merrylegs. I had the best of it. I always carried the mistress. Her weight was little, her voice was sweet, and her hand was so light on the rein that I was guided almost without feeling it. I always wanted to know why Sir Oliver had such a very short tail. It really was only 6 or 7 inches long. And on one of our holidays in the orchard, I asked him why he had such a short tail. "It was no accident," he answered. "It was a cruel act. When I was young, they took me to a place where these cruel things were done. They tied me up and then cut off my long and beautiful tail." "How dreadful!" I exclaimed. "Yes, it was dreadful. But it was not only the pain that lasted a long time. It was this: how could I ever brush the flies off my sides and my hind legs any more? You who have tails just whisk the flies off without thinking about it. And you don't know what a torment it is to have them settle upon you and sting and sting. But thank heaven they don't do it now. Why did they do it then? Said Ginger. For fashion, said the old horse with a stamp on his foot. I suppose it is fashion that makes them strap our heads up with those horrid bits that I was tortured with in London, said Ginger. Of course it is, said he. Look at the way they cut off their dogs' tails and ears to make them look plucky and sharp. Why don't they cut their own children's ears into points to make them look sharp? Why don't they cut the end off their noses to make them look plucky? One would be just as sensible as the other. What right do they have to torment and disfigure God's creatures? Sir Oliver was a gentle but fiery old fellow, and what he said was all so new to me and so dreadful. Ginger was very much excited, declaring that men were both brutes and blockheads. "Who talks about blockheads?" said Merrylegs, who just came up from the old apple tree where he had been rubbing himself against the low branch. "Who talks about blockheads? This is a bad word." "Bad words were made for bad things," said Ginger, and she told him what Sir Oliver had said. "It is all true," said Merrylegs sadly, "and I have seen that about the dogs over and over again where I lived first. But we won't talk about it here. You know that Master and John and James are always good to us. And you know there are good masters and good grooms beside ours, though of course ours are the best." These wise and true words of Merrylegs cooled us all down, especially Sir Oliver, who was very fond of his master. Chapter 5. The longer I lived at Birtwick, the more proud and happy I felt. All people who knew our master and mistress respected and loved them. They were good and kind to everybody and everything. Not only men and women, but horses and donkeys, dogs and cats, cattle and birds. I don't think any man could resist our mistress. That's a pity not all ladies are like her. Our master, too, used to come down very heavy sometimes. I remember one morning we saw a powerful man driving toward us in a light pony chaise, with a beautiful little pony with slender legs and a sensitive head and face. Just as he came to the park gates, the little thing turned toward them, and the man without any warning wrenched the pony's head round with a force and suddenness. And then he began to lash it furiously. The pony plunged forward, but the strong heavy hand held the pretty creature back. It was a dreadful sight to me. My master gave me the word, and we were up with that man in a second. "Mr. Sawyer," he cried in a stern voice, "is that pony made of flesh and blood?" "Flesh and blood and temper," he said. "He's too fond of his own will, and I don't like it." "And do you think," said master sternly, "that treatment like this will make him fond of your will?" "Why did he make that turn? His road was straight on," said the man roughly. "You have often driven that pony up to my place," said master. "It only shows the creature's memory and intelligence. How did he know that you were not going there again? Don't you know that we shall all be judged according to our works, whether they be toward man or toward beast?" Master rode me home slowly, and I could tell by his voice how upset he was. One day Late in the autumn, my master went on business. It was a long journey. There had been a great deal of rain and wind. We went along merrily till we came to the low wooden bridge. The man at the gate said the river was rising fast, and he feared it would be a bad night. Many of the meadows were under water, and in one low part of the road the water was up to my knees. The bottom was good, and master drove gently, so it did not matter that much. As the master's business took him a long time, we did not start for home till rather late in the afternoon. The wind was then much stronger, and my master said to John that he had never been out in such a storm. "I wish we were out of this wood," said my master. "Yes, sir," said John. "It would be horrible if one of these branches came down upon us." After he said that, there was a loud crack, and an oak fell right across the road just before us. I will never say I was not frightened, for I was. I stopped still, and I believe I trembled. Of course I did not turn round or run away. John jumped out and in a moment was at my head. "It was very close," said my master. "What's to be done now?" "Well, sir, we can't drive over that tree. We'll have to go back to the 4 Crossways. That will be 6 miles before we get to the wooden bridge again." So by the time we got to the bridge, the water was over the middle of it. But as that happened sometimes when the floods were out, master did not stop. But the moment my feet touched the first part of the bridge, I was sure there was something wrong. I was afraid to go forward, and I made a dead stop. "Go on, Beauty," said my master, and he gave me a touch with the whip. But I could not move. "There is something wrong, sir," said John. He tried to lead me forward. "Come on, Beauty. What's the matter?" Of course I could not tell him, but I knew very well that the bridge was not safe. Just then the man at the toll gate on the other side ran out of the house with a torch in his hand. "Ho, ho, ho! Hello! Stop!" he cried. "What's the matter?" shouted my master. "The bridge is broken in the middle, and part of it is carried away. If you come on it, you will fall into the river." "Thank God," said my master. "You Beauty," said John, and took the bridle and gently turned me round to the right-hand road by the riverside. The sun had already set. The wind now was not so strong. It grew darker and darker, stiller and stiller. For some time neither master nor John spoke, and then master began in a serious voice. He said that I had saved them. It was more than likely we should all have been drowned. Master said God had given men reason, by which they could find out things for themselves, but he had given animals knowledge, which was much more perfect in its way, and by which they had often saved the lives of men. John knew many stories about dogs and horses, and wonderful things they had done. He thought people did not value their animals, and did not make friends of them as they ought to do. At last we came to the park gates, and found the gardener looking out for us. He said that mistress was very much worried, fearing some accident had happened. We saw a light at the hall door, and at the upper windows, and then mistress ran out, saying, "Are you really safe, my dear? Oh, I have been so worried. Have you had no accident?" "No, my dear, but it is Black Beauty who saved us. He was much wiser than we were." I heard no more. They went into the house, and John took me to the stable. Oh, what a good supper he gave me that night! And I was glad of it, for I was tired. Chapter 6. Early one morning in December, the master came into the stable. He had an open letter in his hand. My groom, John, fastened the door of my box and waited for orders. "Good morning, John," said the master. "I want to know if you have any complaint to make of James." "Complaint, sir? No, sir." "Is he good at his work and respectful to you?" "Yes, sir, always." "That's good. But I must put another question. Do you suspect, when he goes out with the horses to exercise them or to take a message, that he stops to talk to his acquaintances or goes into houses where he has no business, leaving the horses outside?" "No, sir, certainly not. And if anybody says that about James, I don't believe it. And I will say this, sir. I never had a more pleasant and honest young fellow in this stable. I can trust his word, and I can trust his work. He's gentle and clever with the horses." The master was grave and attentive, but as John finished his speech, a broad smile appeared on his face. He looked kindly at James, who all this time stood still at the door, and said, "James, my boy, come here. I'm very glad that John's opinion of your character agrees with my own. So now let's talk business. I have a letter from my brother-in-law, Sir Clifford Williams. He wants me to find him a reliable young groom, about 20 or 21 years old, who knows his business. Sir Clifford is a good master, and if you get this place, it will be a good start for you. How old are you, James?" 19 next May, sir." "That's young. What do you think, John?" "Well, sir, it is young, but he is strong. He has not had much experience in driving, but he has a firm hand and a quick eye, and he is very careful and will never harm any horse." In a few days after this conversation, my master and John decided that James should go to Clifford Hall in a month or 6 weeks, and in the meantime he would get all the practice in driving that could be given to him. After this, my master and mistress decided to pay a visit to some friends who lived about 46 miles from our home, and James was to drive them. The first day we traveled 32 miles. There were some long, heavy hills, but James drove so carefully and thoughtfully that we were not at all afraid. We stopped once or twice on the road, and just as the sun was going down, we reached the town where we were to spend the night. We stopped at the principal hotel, which was in the marketplace. It was a very large hotel. We drove under an archway into a long yard, at the further end of which were the stables and coach houses. 2 hostlers came to take us out. The head hostler was a pleasant, active little man with a crooked leg and a yellow striped waistcoat. I never saw a man unbuckle harness so quickly as he did. The other man brought Ginger. James stood by while we were rubbed down and cleaned. When he had done, James stepped up and felt me over. He found my coat as clean and smooth as silk. "Well," he said, "I thought I was pretty quick, but you are much quicker." "Practice makes perfect," said the crooked little hostler, "and it would be a pity if it didn't. 40 years' practice and not perfect. I have been about horses ever since I was 12 years old, in hunting stables and racing stables, and being small, I was a jockey for several years. At the Goodwood, the turf was very slippery, and my poor larkspur fell, and I broke my knee, and so I was of no more use there. But I could not live without horses, so I took to the hotels. I can tell how a horse is treated. Look at this one, pleasant, quiet, turns about just as you want him, holds up his feet to be cleaned out, or anything else you please to wish. And another one is fidgety, won't move the right way, or starts across the stall, tosses up his head as soon as you come near him, lays his ears, and seems afraid of you. Poor things! I know what sort of treatment they have had. I like to hear you talk, said James. That's the way we lay it down at home, at our master's. Who is your master, young man? He is Squire Gordon, of Birtwick Park, the other side the Beacon Hills, said James. Ah, I have heard of him. The best rider in the county. I believe he is, said James. But he rides very little now, since the poor young master was killed. Poor gentleman! I read about it in the paper. A fine horse killed, too. Yes, said James. He was a splendid creature, brother to this one, and just like him. Pity, said the old man. It was a bad place to leap. No chance for a horse to see where he is going. I am for bold riding as much as any man, but still there are some leaps that only a very experienced old huntsman has any right to take. A man's life and a horse's life are worth more than a fox's tail. Chapter 7. Later in the evening, the second hostler brought in a traveller's horse, and while he was cleaning him, a young man with a pipe in his mouth came into the stable to gossip. "Toller," said the hostler, "put some hay down into this horse's rack, will you?" "All right," said the other man, and I heard him step across the floor overhead and put down the hay. Then James came to look at us, and after that the door was locked. I cannot say how long I had slept, but I woke up very uncomfortable. I hardly knew why I got up. The air was thick and choking. Ginger was coughing, and one of the other horses seemed very restless. It was quite dark, and I could see nothing. The stable was full of smoke, and I could hardly breathe. The trap-door was open, and the smoke was coming through it. I listened, and heard a soft noise and a low crackling and snapping. I did not know what it was, but the sound was so strange that it made me tremble all over. The other horses were all awake. At last I heard steps outside. The hostler with the lantern began to untie the horses, but he was so frightened that he frightened me even more. The first horse would not go with him. He tried the second and third, and they too refused to go. Then he came to me and tried to drag me out of the stall by force, but that was useless. He tried us all by turns and then left the stable. No doubt we were very foolish, but danger seemed to be all round, and there was nobody we could trust, and all was strange and uncertain. The fresh air was coming in through the open door, making it easier to breathe, but the rushing sound overhead grew louder, and as I looked upward through the bars of my empty rack, I saw a red light flickering on the wall. Then I heard a cry of "Fire!" outside, and the old hostler quietly and quickly came in. He got one horse out and went to another, but the flames were playing round the trapdoor, and the roaring overhead was dreadful. The next thing I heard was James's voice, quiet and cheery as it always was. "Come, my beauties, it is time for us to be off, so wake up and come along." I stood nearest to the door, so he came to me first, patting me as he came in. "Come, Beauty, we'll soon be out of this fire, my boy." He took the scarf off his neck and tied it lightly over my eyes and led me out of the stable. Safe in the yard, he slipped the scarf off my eyes and shouted, "Somebody, take this horse while I go back for the other." There was much confusion in the yard. I could see flashes of red light and heard a loud and clear voice which I knew was Master's. "James Howard! James Howard! Are you there?" There was no answer, but I heard that something was falling in the stable, and the next moment I gave a loud, joyful neigh, for I saw James coming through the smoke leading Ginger with him. She was coughing, and he could not speak. "My brave lad," said Master, putting his hand on his shoulder, "are you hurt?" James shook his head, for he could not speak. Then, from the marketplace, there came a sound of galloping feet and loud rumbling wheels. "This is the fire engine! The fire engine!" shouted 2 or 3 voices. "Stand back! Make way!" And 2 horses dashed into the yard with a heavy engine behind them. The firemen leaped to the ground. There was no need to ask where the fire was. It was rolling up from the roof. We got out as fast as we could into the broad, quiet marketplace. The stars were shining, and except the noise behind us, all was still. Master led the way to a large hotel on the other side, and as soon as the hostler came, he said, "James, I must now hurry to your mistress. Take care of the horses and order whatever you think is needed." And with that, he was gone. The next morning, the master came to see how we were and to speak to James. I did not hear much, but I could see that James looked very happy, and I thought the master was proud of him. The rest of our journey was very easy, and a little after sunset we reached the house of my master's friend. They put us into a clean stable, and the coachman made us very comfortable. He thought a good deal of James when he heard about the fire. "There is one thing quite clear, young man," he said. "Your horses know who they can trust. It is one of the hardest things in the world to get horses out of a stable when there is fire or flood. I don't know why they won't come out, but they won't." We stayed 2 or 3 days at this place, and then returned home. All went well on the journey. We were glad to be in our own stable again, and John was glad to see us. Before he and James left us for the night, James said, "I wonder who is coming in my place." "Little Joe Green at the lodge," said John. "Little Joe Green? He's a child." "He's 14 and a half," said John. "But he's such a little chap." "Yes, he's small, but he's quick and willing, and kind-hearted too. And then he wishes very much to come, and his father would like it. And I know the master would like to give him the chance. I agreed to try him for 6 weeks." "6 weeks?" said James. "It will be 6 months before he can be of much use, John." "Well," said John with a laugh, "work and I are very good friends. I never was afraid of work yet." "You are a very good man," said James. "I wish I may ever be like you." "I don't often speak of myself," said John. "I was just as old as Joseph when my father and mother died of fever and left me and my sister Nella alone in the world, without a relative that could help us. I was a farmer's boy and did not earn enough to keep us, and our mistress saved Nellie from going to the workhouse. Nellie called her her angel. She was like a mother to her. Then I began to work in the stable under old Norman, who was the coachman there then. I had my food at the house, and my bed in the loft, and a suit of clothes, and 3 shillings a week. Norman was like a father to me. Some years after his death, I took his place in the stable. I am not the man who would turn up his nose at a little boy. There is nothing like doing a kind thing, and I am glad I can do it. James said, "You are my best friend except my mother. I hope you won't forget me." "No, lad, no," said John. The next day Joe came to the stables to learn all he could before James left. He learned to sweep the stable, to bring in the straw and hay. He began to clean the harness and helped to wash the carriage. He was too short to groom Ginger and me, and James taught him upon Merrylegs. At last the day came when James had to leave us. Though he was always cheerful, he looked quite downhearted that morning. "You see," he said to John, "I am leaving behind my mother and Betsy, and you, and a good master and mistress, and the horses, and my old Merrylegs, and I shall not know a soul at the new place. I am leaving only because there I shall be able to help my mother better, John." "Hey, James, cheer up. You will make friends there, and your mother will be proud that you have got into such a good place as that." So John cheered him up, but everyone was sorry to lose James. Merrylegs pined after him for several days and went quite off his appetite. So John took him out several mornings, and he was soon all right. Joe's father often came in and gave a little help, and Joe was always eager to learn. Chapter 8. One night, a few days after James left, I was suddenly roused by the stable bell ringing very loud. Then John unlocked the stable door and came in, calling out, "Wake up, Beauty!" He quickly put the saddle on my back and the bridle on my head, and then he took me to the hall door. The squire stood there, with a lamp in his hand. "Now, John," he said, "ride for your life. That is for your mistress's life. There is not a moment to lose. Give this note to Dr. White. Give your horse a rest at the inn, and be back as soon as you can." The church clock struck 3 as we drew up at Dr. White's door. John rang the bell twice, and then knocked at the door like thunder. A window opened, and Dr. White, in his nightcap, put his head out and said, "What do you want?" "Mrs. Gordon is very ill, sir. Master wants you to go at once. He thinks she will die if you don't come. Here is a note." "Wait," he said. "I will come." He shut the window and was soon at the door. "Unfortunately, my horse has been out all day and is very tired, and my son has taken the other horse, so can I have your horse?" "He has come at a gallop almost all the way, sir, and I wanted to give him a rest here, but I think my master won't be against it, sir." "All right," he said. "I will soon be ready." John stood by me and stroked my neck. I was very hot. The doctor came out with his riding whip. "You don't need this whip, sir," said John. "Black Beauty will go till he drops, but please take care of him, sir, if you can." "All right, John," said the doctor, and in a minute John was left far behind. I will not tell you about our way back. The doctor was a heavier man than John, and he was not a very good rider, but I did my very best. When we got there, we saw Joe at the gate. My master had heard us coming and was at the hall door. He spoke not a word. The doctor went into the house with him, and Joe led me to the stable. I was glad to get home, and I am sure Joe did the very best he knew. He rubbed my legs and my chest, but he did not put my warm cloth on me. He thought I was so hot I should not like it. Then he gave me a pail full of water to drink. The water was cold and very good, and I drank it all. Then he gave me some hay and some corn, and thinking he had done right, he went away. Soon I began to shake and tremble, and turned deadly cold. My legs and my chest ached, and I felt sore all over. Oh, how I wished for my warm, thick cloth, as I stood and trembled. I wished for John, but he had 8 miles to walk, so I lay down in my straw and tried to go to sleep. After a long while, I heard John at the door. I gave a low moan, for I was in great pain. He was at my side in a moment. I could not tell him how I felt, but he seemed to know it all. John covered me up with 2 or 3 warm cloths, and then ran to the house for some hot water and made me some warm gruel. I drank it, and then I went to sleep. John was very much upset. He said to himself over and over again, "Stupid boy, the water was cold." I was now very ill. I had a strong inflammation of lungs, and I breathed with pain. John nursed me night and day. He got up 2 or 3 times in the night to come to me. My master, too, often came to see me. "My poor Beauty," he said one day, "my good horse, you saved your mistress' life." I was very glad to hear that. John told my master he never saw a horse go so fast in his life. It seemed the horse knew what the matter was. Of course I did. I do not know how long I was ill. The horse doctor, Mr. Bond, came every day. One day he bled me. I was very weak after it, and thought I should die, and I believe they all thought so too. Ginger and Merrylegs were put in the other stable so that I might be quiet. Any little noise seemed loud. One night John had to give me a medicine. Thomas Green came in to help him. So they went and sat down on a bench in Merryleg's stall. For a while both men sat silent, and then Tom Green said in a low voice, "John, say a kind word to Joe. The boy is broken-hearted. He can't eat his meals and he can't smile. He says it was all his fault, and if Beauty dies no one will ever speak to him again. Talk to him. He is not a bad boy." After a short pause, John said, "I know he is not a bad boy, and if you think I'm hard on the boy, I will give him a good word tomorrow, but only if Beauty is better." "Well, John, thank you. I'm glad you think it was only ignorance." John's voice almost startled me as he answered, "Only ignorance? Only ignorance? How can you talk about only ignorance? Don't you know that it is the worst thing in the world next to wickedness? And it does the most mischief, heaven only knows. If people can say, 'Oh, I didn't know, I didn't mean any harm,' they think it is all right." I heard no more of this conversation. The medicine worked well and sent me to sleep. And in the morning I felt much better, but I often thought of John's words when I came to know more of the world.